ago. It's the conversation. Yeah. Take your mind different places. Now you know. So yeah. We got T.J. McGowan here. What's up, bro?
What's going on, man?
Yo, thank you for coming all the way from the Bronx.
Yeah, man.
Damn, you made a mission out here. I know you gotta cross through the bridge and shit.
It wasn't too bad.
Yo, I just want to start off by saying I met this guy. Well, I knew this guy before he even knew me. Let's put it that way. Yo, I seen you years ago at the New Eurekan Poets Cafe, probably when I was like 19 or 20 years old.
Okay.
And that's when I was writing poetry. And I went to New Eurekan Poets Cafe to, just try and present. At that point, I'm looking at you going up on the stage. I'm like, yo, this guy fucking killed it. And people, you had the people's attention. At that point, I was like, I didn't even know how to present my own work. So I'm looking at you like, oh shit, like, yo, am I gonna be able to get up to this level? And it's so dope. Cause seeing you years after at the Restless Poets Cafe, well, the Restless open mic here in Astoria. Shout out Restless. Then I saw you again. I was like, yo, oh snap! And you killed it again. And I was like, yo, this is so cool to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming.
Hey, dude, thanks for having me. And I appreciate that. And if you saw me at the New Yo, that means I was also I was like just getting into the flow of things too. So I have friends now that I was just like you, and I used to see them at the New Yo and think like, can I do that? Can I be that confident? But then it's almost like that's what then fed me. And then when you start to like meet people and see that everyone kind of starts that way, where we're all, you see someone that's at a different level than you because either they've started before you or they're older or whatever, and you wonder, can I do that? I mean, the first open mic I ever went to, I had no idea what I was doing. I brought like papers from my notebook. I was like nervous. They were shaking. And so I always look at that guy, and then now and see just sort of but it took seeing other artists, befriending other artists to build a confidence, like allow them to let me in, to show me kind of tips and tricks and things to try to build confidence. So then,
When did you build the confidence to write your first book, and why?
So I used to. It's interesting because the first book I ever did, sort of came out a little bit before starting to perform. It's strange. I used to always love writing poetry, and I used to keep a journal to myself pretty much. Maybe in my early 20s, I started sharing that with other people, see what they thought about it. And then I had a friend who pointed out that on Instagram, now this is like many, many years ago, she was like, oh, people are starting to share their poems on Instagram. This is like when it first, now if you go on and you search the poetry hashtag, there's like hundreds of thousands. But back then there was like not many people that thought to like, what if I just took a picture of the poetry I'm writing or typing? And so we both created accounts anonymously because I didn't want anybody to know my name, know my face. And I used to just do that, and people took to what stuff I was writing. And then I explored, not that I intentionally explored writing a book, but at one point, a collection of poems I was writing and I was approaching my 30th birthday. All really had to do with my childhood, and they were all very literal, as opposed to some kind of metaphorical stuff that I was writing. I was writing these very literal sort of stuff, digging through my childhood,
Which people gravitated to more, I assume, right?
Yeah, because then they kind of get this sense that you're actually letting them in past the sort of like, the sort of decoration of poetry. You're kind of letting them in a little deeper.
Wow.
And then, I don't know, one day it was just, I had this like stack, because I still was using my typewriter at the time, of just stuff that all fit like a theme of just my childhood. And I was like, and from there, I think I had like 60 or 70 poems, and I just kept following that. And then the next thing I knew, I had like 200 something poems, and then they ended up getting trimmed down to like 130 or whatever it was for the book. But then, it was me and then another friend that was basically, I think you probably have a book in all of that.
Wow.
And so that's what pushed me to sort of put the first book out on my own, self-publish it, and then that book unintentionally took me to a stage. I was helping someone else organize a mic for their company, and it was at a cafe I had a connection to, and because it was right around the time that book came out, and it was like right around my birthday, he was like, "Oh, dude, you should read from the book." And then that's the first like taste I got of being on a stage with a mic.
Wow.
Was like that, and then like I would say like 2 years went by before I even attempted it again, because I was terrified.
Really?
I was like, I didn't intend to actually ever do any of that.
Wow.
And then kind of got launched into it by someone I trusted, at a place I trusted, and it all just kind of worked.
That's interesting. You and I have a similar story, man.
Okay.
Because, I did the same thing, basically. I self-published when I was 19. This book called Dome of Pele by Axel Owen. Not many people knew that I started writing poetry before. Yeah. And then I went and tried to do performing. And it's wild that you said what you said in terms of like, that shit hit me. In terms of, instead of using the decorative poetry to have something that's more vulnerable and
Sure.
to you, I feel like I had more decorative poetry within that set of poems
Sure.
I published, and it's wild looking back on it now because of what you just said, and it is somewhat true. It takes some time for you to see or even understand what to look at.
Sure.
What was your point of understanding? Like, was it something that somebody else gave to you, or was life just like smacking you in the face with it?
I think, like in terms of like, I guess either like finding a voice or finding what worked or
Perspective, rather.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely partially that book, or what led to that book. When I started just diving deep, like it's weird. You're like you. There's like this vulnerability when you want to create, just to create. Then when you're comfortable with creating, there's like the new vulnerability of like, well, what do I want to use the creativity for? And I still write abstract things that can be interpreted however people want to interpret them, and sometimes that's fun. And then at that time, that really like launched me into wanting to really pursue poetry in a different way. I was like over the vulnerability of creating and over the vulnerability of people reading my words, and now I was like tackling personal vulnerability of things I hadn't addressed, or things that I felt that I actually like healed from, but I had never really documented for myself. And so I started finding that the realer I got with myself, then the realer the writer starting to get, and then people would react to it. And then my editor of that book, it's always stuck with me. She said that I write like, particularly that book, is that I write like glass.
See right through it.
Or that glass can be reflective of both your highs and your lows. When you don't like to look at yourself, when you like to look at yourself. Glass could be smooth and beautiful, and it could also, when it's broken, violent, cut you, and sting. And I always kind of took that. I was like, so now I maybe it's that moment when she said that to me, because now I do try to approach creative stuff where I think of what she said. Like, am I approaching this like glass? Is it trimmed of all its fat? Is it clean? Is it something that reflects me, that someone reads can also see maybe part of their journey in it too? Is it allowing itself to be, clean and dirty? Is it allowing itself to be smooth and sharp? Basically, it all breaks down to like, am I being emotionally honest in the work? So whether it's about my childhood or a relationship, or even just hanging out with my nephews, am I treating every situation in which I'm being emotionally honest to the situation? And then I find that whatever the words are that bring you there, people then relate and say, like people read my book, they didn't live my life, or they didn't my childhood, but there's been plenty of people that have, when it particularly came to like my dad in the book, that are like, oh, I had, this reminds me of my mom or my dad, or I lost my grandma to cancer when she was younger, or my mother was an alcoholic. Like there's pieces of unfortunate circumstances in all our lives that sometimes art, creativity allows us to either not feel alone, which that's what poetry gave me the most, was other people don't realize like what they give back to you when they say that they can relate.
Right.
And it's like, wow, thank you for even taking the time to read the words. But the fact that you've now gifted me a feeling of not being as alone as I might once have been before you told me that. I know I'm going on like a tangent here, but yeah, I think I think the moment of just in thinking in real time right now, having her tell me that I wrote like glass and that I should always kind of like try to achieve that might have been the moment where it was like, all right, stick to the emotional honesty you put into this project and try to bring it other places.
Wow. You know, you speaking about how you break down, especially just honesty, I feel like that's what would break down a good movie. You know?
Sure.
Because it's showing all perspectives in an honest point. You know, I don't really like movies that are just based out of too much of one person's perspective.
Sure.
I feel like it loses value. When you see things from different sides, it's kind of like, whoa, would you ever consider yourself doing something cinematic with your poetry?
Oh, I mean, I have. So I went to film school. I was obsessed. I mean, I'm still like a major film nerd. You can just ask my girlfriend. It's like all I talk about. But yeah, I did one like poetry type film a couple of years. Like it was actually 2020. It was like during the pandemic for a side project with my buddy Denny, where he started having me. We like clicked at a kind of like a jazz poetry open mic. He brought his guitar, and then we clicked afterwards, became friends, and we started making stuff under like another group we called Subtle Bodies, where I was writing poetry specifically to his sort of like trippy psychedelic rhythms and stuff like that. And we did one. It was called Apocalyptic Hearts. We did it. Like I wrote it. Then I went to his studio. Literally the first time he had me over his studio, he recorded the 4 poems right away. And then like a week later, they were like this sort of 18-minute kind of interwoven story that he produced. And then we went with with my friend Destiny, who's also another poet, and then my buddy Leoné, who I've known like my entire life, came out and they acted in this sort of like post-apocalyptic lovers sort of scenario that I got to direct and incorporate the poetry and music.
Wow.
And that was a lot of fun. I mean, it was like all my little creative dreams coming true.
What are the strings that go behind that in terms like of actual shooting? You come up with basically the production, right? In terms of what's going to be said.
Yeah.
And who determines the visuals in this?
I mean, I will say one benefit I have is not that I work in production, and I'm very happy that I do that. And then there's a lot of stuff I've learned being a coordinator and a production manager as far as the organizational aspect of like a film project or a commercial project. So I'm beneficial in the way I'm actually able to take stuff from my job that helped me execute the poetry film in a way that, because obviously I'm running on like barely a budget. So we're just having a camera guy essentially with some lights and sort of finding the right person that can do that. Leaning into like a poetry friend and a childhood friend to act in it for me. And for me, it was examining if you had something you like, that if someone gave me $1 and their cell phone, like I could probably, if you work within the dollar and the means you have, you could probably make something. You know what I'm saying? Like there's always a way. As long as you don't go beyond what you have at your fingertips, you can make things seem like to work for your project. So I knew we had the poetry in place with the music. We had that done. So it was like kind of really just making an extended music video almost with a story within it. But it's gonna be more like a film.
It's animation.
So then we just played into the themes of the poems. It was about this. When I was writing, it was about the 2 last lovers left on the planet Earth after everyone had vanished. So I'm like, all right, this actually helps us because I only really then need 2 leads.
Mm-hmm.
And we just need to find isolated locations where we can make it seem like they're alone.
Mm-hmm.
And then people ask me where's some of the things we shot in that, and I'm like, oh, Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx. There's trails that barely anybody ever takes. So we went back there. It's all overgrown. They look like they're kind of, we're going to. So it's like when you were setting up before, I said like as long as everything is within the frame.
Right.
So like I kept that mentality. It was like what like there's scenes where we're shooting at a waterfront, and literally like right off frame. There's families and stuff swimming in the water.
Wow.
But like he looks like he's isolated on a beach at the end of the world.
Wow.
But I didn't have permits or permission to like tell those people they can't be there.
Right.
So we're like, all right, we gotta shoot around this.
Right.
So we were like, so it's literally like there's frames of the little poetry film where there's the rest of the world is happening outside of it, and you're just trying to figure out like, as long as I can convince people that watch this that he's alone on the beach, that's all that matters.
Right.
And so just having some tricks and stuff that I knew from what I do for a living, mixed with just that mentality, I think helped us achieve what we could within the limits of what we had available.
Right.
I'm proud of that, and people seem to be into it when they give it a chance to watch it. I'd love to do something like that again, but it takes a toll. It does still take some money, and so it's not like you can like snap your fingers and then. That was like 3 years ago now. Right. And I'm still always like, well, what could I do next? And how could I achieve it? And how do I not go beyond the means that I have to get it done?
Right.
Main thing was we had fun making it. So a lot of times at work, sets can become like 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours. And it can be pretty like grueling if you're doing multiple days in a row and stuff. So with this, I was like, if I'm doing what I essentially do at work, but for myself, this has to be easy and it has to be fun and everyone involved has to have fun. And I'm not going to push people to like crazy long days and we're going to get what we need and we're going to move on. So that was like another big thing was, is this going to feel like work or is this going to feel like fun?
Right. That's very considerate. I've definitely worked with people that it's all different. You know, people have different ways of obtaining their objective. But it sounds like when it's about you or what you want to do in your time with other people, you want to make it as relaxing and as a breeze as possible, which is amazing.
I feel like you get so much more from treating people like people.
Right.
And then especially if you're doing something that's passion related. Where you're leaning on people that might be doing you favors, and then obviously you can do favors back for them. You can't take advantage of that.
Right.
And if you don't, that's like the thing. It's like if you don't take advantage of that, they'll actually start to get super into what they're helping you make because you're treating them with respect. You're not taking up all of their time if they're doing it to help you out. You're trying to feature them and give them, like the more I can make the vision better, also the better you look. And then it starts to make the collaborative effort be like, there's no film, movie, or there's no TV show. There's no really any kind of creative thing that's just a person.
Right.
It's like you could say this is my vision and this is what I wrote, but you have to have the camera person buying into you. You have to have the editor buying into you. You have to have the people you're asking to lead it. Especially I was asking 2 friends that not necessarily had acted in stuff, so that's vulnerable for them. There's nerves involved in that. So if I'm on top of that, not making them comfortable, or I'm taking, they're coming out on a Saturday between their life and work to do this, and if I'm keeping them there for 10, 12 hours like on a normal set would be, you're going to start to just like wear people down. They're not going to buy in as much. Respecting people is like, in my mind, and being kind to them, especially when you're working on something together, it pays dividends. I've learned in my life, through, even my job. And just personal circumstances, even with poetry. Like I've had back in the day, like hosts tell you, like if you like that being nice to a host, being nice to a venue, not to even gain something, but just being a nice person, being kind to them, respecting their time, respecting the duty and job they have to get done. People just I just, it happens with me when someone's nice and kind to me, and if we're working, like, you remember that person.
Oh yeah.
You remember that person if there's an opportunity arises. You remember them if you want to even do another collaborative thing together. Do I gel with this person? They have a good attitude. They're respectful. It's like all of that. Like, I think pays dividends as opposed to when someone's like, because I've done favor things for people where I'm like, wow, like we're here for like, very long all day, and sort of you feel like I didn't think this was what it was going to be, and so I try to not do that, and I think it helps the collaborative effort,
right,
in general. If you're creating, if you're getting a bunch of creatives together to do something outside of their day job, outside of their creative pursuit, it's got to be fun, or it's like it's got to be passionate and fun and
worth it.
And worth it. And that doesn't mean you can't get heavy with whatever you're making. But it can still, should be something that makes everyone feel like, wow, that was a great way to spend that time with my.
The best way. It sounds like it's the best way to get it too. Best way to get your shot, what you want out of it, the quality of it. Because people are stressed out. You're not gonna get what you desire anyway.
They're gonna be somewhere else, especially if they've not really acted before. If you're not getting them comfortable, like, that's a vulnerable thing. There's a few times where I've had to like be in front of a camera, and it's like it can be very vulnerable if you're being asked. And I don't even say that in like some kind of cliche actory way. It's just the red light goes on, and you're supposed to do a thing, and you're just, I hope I don't mess this up. I hope I don't look stupid. I hope I look good on camera. I hope I'm not wasting this person's time and I'm bad on their behalf and they're asking me to do this. So all of that, I'm like, you got to like figure out ways to just, if everyone's having a good time and everyone feels comfortable, they'll actually get to where you want to go.
Right. Was that a feeling that you had going on to Open?
Oh, totally, man. I mean,
how was that? Talk to me about that. How'd you even get into that?
So I remember like a couple of years ago, they had a producer that reached out to me, and it never my schedule was never available to do the show. And then I got basically an email that they were looking for, because it was Poetry Month in April, to have a poet be on the next episode, or one of the next episodes, to be for the Open Artist Spotlight. And then luckily, also one thing I benefit from is my bosses are awesome. Like, I say that with full confidence. So it was a weekday that they shoot that. 2 days beforehand, I had to let them know. And I just asked my boss, I was like, hey, man, I have this opportunity to do poetry on Friday morning for Open It. And like, it was like a no-brainer to him. He was like, yeah, they just come in after. Like, nice. They've always been
understanding. Because
like, they're also coming from creative pursuits. I mean, they run a production company. They've always been film guys, and they grew up shooting and editing music videos back when they were younger. So they understand the desire for creative pursuit, and so they've always been super awesome. I mean, there's so many poetry features and stuff that the only way I was ever actually to show up on time was because my job has been cool enough to be like, leave a half hour early if you got to beat traffic, or so I benefit from that. So like Open really like partially only happened because they were cool to like with the 48 hours notice to be like, yeah, dude, just get that done. Oh yeah. Kill it, and then come in and work.
I feel like people don't understand how amazing that is, because a lot of places would just be like,
I know. I know. Yeah, it's and that literally wouldn't have happened if they didn't say yes. You can come in.
Wow.
Later.
So, what was the experience like when you got there? Did that thought that you just said prior about the red light going, and you just have
a little bit? It's like weird, because what I do for a living, there's sometimes we do live stuff, but we're not really like a live studio place. So like, as much as I know about production, when I got to a live studio, I'm like, this is vastly different than normal type of production I'd be on.
How?
Just because a live element, it's just the live studio, it's multicam, you're in a studio with tons of lights on you, and there's no like do-over, so your performance you get once, and your interview you get once, and so, but everyone was cool from the moment I got there, and all I really did was just in their like green room was just continuously practice the piece I was gonna do.
Oh yeah.
Like
which you killed, by the way. You did
thank
that
you,
shit. Hell yeah.
Appreciate it.
I was there watching the whole show.
Like I was just over and over and over again until we got into like the studio, and then was waiting my turn. The performance, I felt comfortable. The interview, that was where I was at least a little less comfortable because it's it's just you're waiting.
You seemed more comfortable though.
Everyone, I feel like
you seem comfortable. Sorry, you seem comfortable in both. Honestly.
When I watched it, you can kind of tell me. I do this like I wipe the sweat. You can see me on camera wipe the sweat off my palms.
Oh, okay, that's what.
I'm like, oh, that's me settling into my nerves.
Okay.
Because you're brought on. Everyone was awesome. Rena was like awesome. Like, you get a little prep beforehand, but then all of a sudden it's just go. Mm-hmm. It's going to be 8. It's only going to be 8 minutes. Mm. So then I have to remind myself, it's not as free form as what we're doing right now. She's going to lead into a question, and I have to be able, if I want to move on to plug other things or whatever, right. I can't do my normal. Right. So, I had to get used, I was used to that. And then, then there's just like lights on you and you do your thing. And then the performance I felt really comfortable doing. And then afterwards, like people asked me like, oh, so how'd it go with the interview? And I was like, part of me like blurred out. And I don't even know what I might have even said because I was just like a little nervous, like the interview and stuff. But it was awesome. It was like a great time. And
why'd you choose that poem? Want to say it again?
Give Me Love?
Yeah, why'd you choose Give Me Love by T.J. McGowan?
So it's just always like stuck with me. And it's always the one that I think it blends. Interestingly enough, it's from that musical side project that short film was made for. Where it just always resonated with me at the time I wrote it. And I feel like it's a great blend of everything I love about poetry. Like I love like the written and read word for like a book comes out and you take it, you go home and you read it, you internalize it and you make whatever that you project your own opinions upon it. Mm. But then I also love performance and spoken word. Mm. And spoken word a lot of times is almost like it's like a cousin to hip hop, and you get to learn how to like shape cadence and syllable patterns and allow yourself to enter and exit rhyme patterns if you'd like to. And like I love that. And so I just started. I feel like I was doing that, and I have a lot of spoken word pieces that I do love that feel very just in that vein of like they were strategized as spoken word pieces. Then I have my books, which is like these are meant for people to read on their own time and not necessarily for me to perform. They're shorter. And I was like, it's weird. I love doing both these things. Like, why can't I do that? And that project, Apocalyptic Hearts, is the first time I felt like I was starting to do that. And then Give Me Love just feels like the perfect balance of the different worlds of poetry that I love together.
And that poem was in Apocalyptic now?
Yeah, that like it ends it. And it always resonated with me. It always resonated with my buddy Denny at the time when he was recording me and mixing to it and adding instrumentals to it. It's weirdly one that like people always like do ask about, or they hope that like I'm gonna do it when I go somewhere, which is interesting too. And I don't know, did they hear me do it someplace else a cappella? Did they see the film? Did they hear it on Spotify? And so then, and it's just sort of, I was just thinking with BronxNet, it's going to be on morning television. And I have a chance to,
which is amazing, by the way. Like what?
So I'm like, I have a chance to like put something good into the world. I felt like I could have picked any number of sort of more depressing pieces I have, or more introspective, hard, ugly pieces and things that, which is all good and well, and I love those as much as I love. But I was sort of, it just felt right that I should put something positive. And I think what I love is that I very rarely thought I could write a happy poem. And obviously there's moments in it that are not, it's more just sort of about the power of love in sort of dark times. And I don't know, it felt right, to go on a show, a morning show, and people were going to tune in and they might hear a poet and put put something more a little positive out there.
What made you choose the title Apocalyptic Now?
Or Apocalyptic Hearts.
Apocalyptic Hearts?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. Why Apocalyptic Hearts?
So there's
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. I had written the 4 poems first. And it's Give Me Love. I'm so bad at this. Give Me Love.
Don't worry, like anything I could just edit out.
No,
Just skip over to the part.
but like the 4 basically the theme of the poems in my mind were like these 2 lovers that were basically the last lovers left alive, and they sort of get their heartstrings severed, and they're kind of like on this journey back to each other. And so that was like the arc of it. And then when we were looking for a name to like call it, I guess you would call it an EP or that just like kept ringing out in my head. It was like Apocalyptic Hearts.
Wow.
You know, like they're supposed to be in a literal apocalypse, but also just the severing of love can feel apocalyptic. You know, and sort of it was all about this journey back. And then Give Me Love is basically the end poem to the whole piece, where they sort of reattach their heartstrings. We like did this thing where they had literal like red ropes coming out of their like chests that were like frayed at the end. So they kind of rejoin during Give Me Love in the film.
Wow.
I feel like that's also probably why anyone that watched it then asks if they to hear it. It's just like the last thing you hear in the film is that poem.
Wow.
So I think it's the most
Resonate.
visually impactful part of the film. And so that's the last one you're hearing. So I think that's why it just stuck in people's heads.
Right.
And in mine too, you know.
It has a flow. I think that's the reason why I was telling you before how, like, you know, you can hear a lot of different poets, and some poets have different ways of delivering their poetry. But I feel like you have a certain rhythm in your poetry. Like, I feel like you could, if you wanted to, spit some shit, you heard?
No, I've listen, like I grew up with a sister that always had hip hop playing, like Biggie.
You're from the Bronx.
Biggie was over. I grew up in Mount Vernon, like right outside of the Bronx.
Word.
And then I somehow, you know, I went all over the place and ended up now I've been in the Bronx for about like 10 years. But yeah, she, I think all of that has influenced me in some way. You know, my sister hip hop, and then just all my childhood friends. It was always like a part of our lives. Was just like hip hop, rap culture. But then I had other influence, like my dad was a rock guy, my mom was like an oldies, and so there was just like all these like different sounds always throughout the house that kind of probably sit in my brain. And then later on in life, when I decided to try to be creative, you pull from what you know, so you're being influenced by, again, like the marriage of what I love about this particular type of poetry, but then when it comes to Give Me Love and going to someone's studio and applying that to music, even though we weren't making like hip hop or rap, there was still a level of, I wanted this to be beyond just like a poem, where it has some kind of cadence or flow, like you're saying, and trying to find what that is for me. And then on my spoken word album, there's the last 2 tracks are kind of more like rap songs.
And it's for Apocalyptic.
No, I did a spoken word album.
What's the name of it?
I Wear Another Man's Name.
I Wear Another Man's Name.
Yeah, and again, it's like it's almost like the spoken word version of like my book in a way, where I'm still tackling a lot of issues with me and my dad, but in talking to getting it done, and there's 8 tracks on it, and the first 6 are poems, but they're all set to music. In some capacity, but they're all very free form. So there's no real sort of bar like limit that I'm being kept to. And then we had thought like how should we end this album? And the idea was like, oh, you should like evolve. You should show like an evolution outside of the man you're talking about, as far as yourself and your dad, and into something new. And so it was like, oh, well, what does that mean? And then it was like, oh, you should rap, and you should make 2 songs. You should end with songs, like concrete songs. And that was scarier than spitting poems over sort of free form instrumental.
Because
Actually having someone sit there and be like, what you wrote is way too long. You only have 8, 12, whatever, 16 bars here.
right.
And you need to stay within that. And that actually being given that confinement, that challenge was like, it was good. It was a gift and a curse. It's a gift because I love now having new things make me uncomfortable creatively. And all you can really do is try it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't work, you can at least say you tried.
Right.
So I always look at those two, whether I like them or I cringe at them or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, they exist. And I tried this. And I'm happy I tried it. But I appreciate and respect what goes into a rapper and what they have to curate and how they have to be so succinct in what their message is so that it's not empty words, but that it's fitting within the confinement of the beat so that it has a flow that's nice to the ears. And just all of that was like scary to me. And I did my best, I think. I tried. And I'm happy I did it. And so I do have 2 like rap songs that exist in the world on Spotify somewhere.
You heard?
And I've been featured on one other person's, which was a lot of fun too. But yeah, it was still it was scary. Like the poets out like spoken where you get to lean so much on doing whatever you want because there's no beat keeping you in somewhere. So I think we poets, we benefit and have it a little easier than musicians by far because we can say, well, there's nothing else here. So I can stretch my rhyme pattern or I can choose not to even rhyme on this line and then come back to it later and it still will feel, if everything remains sort of loose, everyone will kind of like go along with it as cohesive because you're kind of, it's just you and air, you know,
Right.
where the using music, it was a challenge, a fun challenge. I'm happy I tried it. And yeah, I got 2 songs out of it.
Oh yeah. Now, was that before or after God is a Woman?
So that's all before. Yeah, God is a Woman is like the newest thing.
And what brought you to that? Like I've heard that expression before. God is a Woman. I think Ariana Grande.
Yeah. Which I learned after the fact. But no, it's interesting, man. I feel like I've done a lot of cool stuff, and at the same time, in my mind, I'm like, I haven't done enough. Because I did, We Are Not One Thing was the first book I ever did. But that's like approaching 8 or 9 years ago. A full-length book of poetry that you could have of mine. From then, and then God is a Woman, in between there's been other stuff. Like I did the spoken word album, which, you know, it's I still don't classify it like the true form of poetry that I started with. But I did the spoken word album. And I've done the Subtle Body side project with my buddy Danny with music to poetry. It's like that, another cool challenge. I did the novel last year. And then and then I've had a few other like smaller chapbooks, like God is a Woman's a chapbook, but come out in limited run. Like 2 years ago, I had one come out in limited run, and you either bought it when it got there, and then once it sold out, it didn't exist anymore. And I had another one like that. But then it was weird. I was talking to a friend, and they were like, "You haven't put out like poetry in the same vein as what you started with in almost 8 or 9 years, where like people could read it, like and hold it." And I was like, "Oh shit! Like, yeah, you're right. I kind of veered off in all these other avenues." And then it was like, all right, I think maybe I do want to return back to that. And then, you know, probably I would say pandemic type, I wrote the novel during that, but then I also started exploring with other poetry towards the tail end of it. And I had a friend once ask what, like basically, in discussion at an event with other people speaking about their beliefs, I was sort of like, I don't want to like offend anybody with my beliefs. So I kind of kept like, but someone we were just talking, and then they kind of started asking me what I believed in and if I believed in God and heaven and all this sort of stuff. And then when I kind of basically like, well, I'm an atheist if I had to pick. And so then it was just a simple question of, so then what would God be to me if I had no choice but to define it? And that question just sent me like into a creative tailspin in my mind of, I was like, fuck, what would I? And everything I kept coming back to was just like lovers or women that helped raise me and my family. Everything just kept coming back to like this just feminine energy, like feminine power, women identifying. Like it just kept coming back to like the real world. So I was like, all right, my pragmatic brain can only define God in something I can find in like the tangible world. And I was like, it just constantly kept coming back to women in my life. And then I expanded that beyond to like just women in general, the idea of women, the power of femininity, how you find that in nature, how you find, and I was just like, like like
Mother Nature.
doing that, right? So then that was like the birth of it was all right. So God is a woman, and then I just started exploring that through different avenues, women in my life, and then I had that small collection. Came out of that, wasn't going to do anything with it. Like I was like, I've never really written in this kind of vein, because it even gets sort of into like, because then I started applying, I grew up Roman Catholic. So a lot of times people think I'm religious, because throughout my poetry I've used religious symbolism in ways to mean other things for myself. And I'm fine if people interpret that are faith-based and they interpret that, and that's great. But I've always had fun playing with the religious terminology and symbolism I grew up with in ways to embody that for myself in some way.
Can you give an example?
Like I used to have this poem. So one time it's kind of a funny story. One time I got invited to do a feature at a poetry show in the Bronx, and I was like excited to do it. And I had a piece I used to do that really talked about sort of like the highs and lows of life and getting through grief. And it ends where I essentially say that we're that people are divine, and I kind of end with sort of divinity and universal language and calling things holy and I've done similar thing with a piece I had about my own eating disorders, where I kind of had like language where like that was my only God, like that was like my only faith at the time, was like this awful like thing, like this binging, purging,
right.
And so I and so I did this one piece where it ends where I kind of equate that people, even if we're like kind of half broken and stuff, we're still divine. And then I'm chilling and everyone else is performing, and a couple people keep coming up to me from the organization talking about it, and then leading into like the territory of God and faith and Christianity. And at first I was like, oh, maybe they're just interpreting that way. And then I'm like looking around, I was like, oh, I think this whole event is run by a church. It finally clicked in my mind. And I was like, oh, and I was like, oh shit, they're equate. And I was like, well, I was in their shoes. And I heard someone do that piece. I might also interpret that he's like a devout Christian. Then there was like the one awkward conversation where like I had to then eventually be able to say that I wasn't. Right. But not in a way to like try to offend people. Right. But just, that I wasn't when they had invited me to like to the church. And I was like, oh, I'm actually not. But that's just like one example I remember where a thing I did that wasn't religious to me necessarily, but had like language borrowed from religion for other meanings in a religious space. Obviously, it's going to be interpreted as religious.
So you don't believe in God?
Not in like...
and I'm not coming at you.
No. Like, not in a... like I always had an issue when I was a kid, because I used to go to CCD, It's my grandmother was my third grade CCD teacher, so that was a whole bunch of fears at once. Because I'm like, I don't think I believe in all this, but if I say that out loud, I'm gonna be in deep shit. Because like my grandmother was very devout, and like my grandfather was. My uncle, who I'm like best friends with, he's very devout, and they've always given me space to be whatever I wanted to be. I don't. Yeah, I don't. I didn't like when I used to be in school or go to church, the idea of like he, because I used to be like, it's like there was like some part of me that was always like, I don't think this is like a that type. If it's not a physical being, I couldn't grasp like how we always said, like father, he, and I get it. It might also just be simply that we have to use language to attribute to something beyond our realm of thinking. I understand that aspect of it, but I always looked at it like if there was. I didn't buy into sort of the gender ideology of like a god. But as a kid, it was just like a gut feeling. As I got older, I could then not put words to that. And I didn't believe in, depending on what aspect of it was like, this is either of like a wrathful God, that like a vengeful God, or a sort of, if you, like that sin keeps you in line. I always had an issue with that. And I was a Boy Scout for a lot of my life. And the Boy Scouts are also based in essentially Roman Catholicism, so that's part that gets like woven in, and I had a lot of rebellious nature to that too when I was a kid, and just I found other friends that I had that came from different religions. Their religions seemed more like peace oriented in a way, or like less like this intense idea of condemnation that if you get out of line in any way, and so then I used to get confused. Well, is this forgiving God, or is it a vengeful God? If I do something bad, aren't I supposed to go to confession and then I'll still make it into heaven, right? Like, and I used to be very confused and conflicted. And I might be one of the only kids in my CCD that got sent to the equivalent of the principal's office. I feel like, because I remember when they told me that I had to stop asking questions, and that's really kind of when I got off the bus. I got confirmed and all that, and then I sort of then was like, all right, I'm being told like. I'd asked too many questions in class, and I just sort of bought more into like philosophical thought processes as I got older. That I'm not sitting here saying I know what made all of this. I'm not sitting here and saying I'm ignorant. To not think that there's something beyond my understanding that started the engine, and that runs it in some capacity. But I looked at it more as like, if there's good and evil, that has to come from somewhere. And that for me, it's more like whatever the unknown is kind of like a harmonious state.
Of both?
That like, it's not sitting there judging you and condemning you to hell, or watching you jerk off, or like all these kind of like, it's not like, that it's just like a harmonious state, that in order for there to be left and right, or in order for good and evil, or up and down, that whatever got things going had to kind of had to have like an equal measure of both in order to have opposing forces. Whether we're talking like thought process, or we're talking even like science, where you see dualities in nature and all that.
Right.
So I feel like whatever it is has to have like the equal duality, and isn't necessarily judging people or applying pressure to people to be a certain way. So it was the organized religion aspect that kind of turned me off to the whole idea when I was younger. I turned off my everything. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in this. I don't believe in that. But as I've gotten older and I've been able to venture down my own path of thought, and in that, I'm just not sure that any organized religion is going to have the correct answer. And that was the things I used to get in trouble for, was like asking. I'll never forget. I asked, it was like my 5th or 6th grade CCD teacher. if we were right, if the church that we went to was right, like, what happens to everyone that chose to believe a different religion when they die? You're telling me that if there is some better place, none of them get to go because they might have been born into the wrong choice.
Right.
And then I went a step further, and I and I asked him, well, what happened to people before our religion existed? Like, Roman Catholicism is like old, but
Sumerian time.
there's clearly there was civilizations that existed before Roman Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, what happened to everyone before it? Wouldn't that make so you're essentially saying that their entire life is meaningless because our religion didn't exist for them? And I just couldn't. And I literally was told to go down to like the sister's office. And then
you said this out in the classroom? You said it in the classroom? Like that?
I just asked him those questions, like,
Okay.
what it was simpler terms, like sort of what happened to people that didn't believe in our religion and what happened to people before it. And instead of getting like any kind of dialogue, the teacher just told me to leave the room and go down to like the sister's office.
Right.
And I sat there, and then I got a talking to and was told to like basically focus on the work in the book and ask like less questions. And I was like, this is fishy. and so that's like, I've loosened on my like, it's not real, from when I was a kid.
So
And more into like understanding there's something beyond me.
Right.
I just don't know if I could define it correctly.
Have you ever read the short story The Egg by Andy Weir?
No.
It's really good. You should check it out. But I don't even know if I should get into it now or have you read it on your own time. I'll get into it now. Well, I'll give you my perspective from it.
Yeah.
What I feel is that our brains are so powerful that whatever you want it to be is going to be. That's what I feel. So, like, if you feel like nothing's going to happen to you, then nothing's going to happen to you. If you feel like you're going to be in a heaven, I feel like you're going to be in a heaven. I feel like if you're filled with guilt and you feel like you're going to go to hell, you're going to go to that hell. If you feel like you're going to be flying through the universe, I feel like you're going to be flying through the universe. I think our brains are that powerful because our desires and wants are different, based out of many different things, right? Where we're born, how we were raised, who raised us, ecosystem, all that.
Sure.
And what you say about civilizations and people living before the time of each of these religions, right? Like Christianity, you can go back 2,000 years. Judaism, you can go back 5,000 years. I think Hinduism, if I'm not mistaken, you can go back 14,000. Like something even like longer ago. But everyone has a different direction where they want to bring their faith, right, from. And it's a delicate topic for some. And for others, it's measured by their understanding and want to understand of it.
Sure.
Because if you don't want to understand, if you don't even dig deep, how would you even know? Or are you just choosing to be blind to the knowledge of it?
Sure.
And but there's many mysteries besides God. We can see amongst the earth, like let's say like the pyramids, and how it was built during that period. You know, some people say it was like a chisel.
Sure.
These things weighed millions of tons. The way we are considered to be now is drastically different from how it was then.
Sure.
Like, to even think about that there were people that understood how to create that. If you ask me and put me in the middle of the desert and say, build a fucking sandcastle, I'll probably still have some trouble. I'll be like, where's the water at?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
So, do you feel like the human psyche goes through kind of like waves of understanding a lot of shit and then being stupid and understanding a lot of shit?
Oh, yeah. Stupid? Yeah, and I think it's like cyclical, probably societal, but then cyclical, like, I mean, even individually.
So, have you ever heard of sacred geometry? That's why people are really into sacred geometry.
Like I don't like I've heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely don't like prescribe to it, but I'm sort of know like kind of what it is supposed to be, but I won't say like I'm any kind of expert on any topic.
So let me just say right away, I believe in God. Straight up, like not God through the sense of like religious.
Sure.
Like only because I know man created the Bible. How could man even understand God?
Sure.
But the person I had on prior to this episode, Samuel, he has a very, very deep understanding of the Bible. And the one thing that he said to me was that kind of like stuck. Well, many things stuck, but one of the things that stuck was that if you look at the Bible, the Christian Bible, it's been through like thousands and thousands of iterations, right?
Sure.
But the messages stay the same. Most religions are not made fun of, but Christian religion is like almost the most made fun of. Like he said, if the devil would play any type of trick, right, and if this is the devil's playground, if we're living in the devil's world, because he's trying to say that this is the reason why these people won't follow you, or this is the these people won't follow you, these people won't follow you, these people won't follow you. Like, he's here on Judgment Day. The sense of an apocalypse is coming, apparently, right? And I'm putting air quotes because who knows?
Sure.
But it's based out of this judgment, which is now. Now, I feel that God is, in fact, being spoken through many different people, even if they're not noticing. Even maybe through you, you know? And there's a certain, I feel like, acceptance people have to have of one another to then see the beauty of God's work, if that makes any sense.
No, sure.
Because the universe itself, right? It's a bunch of different universes, a bunch of different alignments. People are almost their own universe in a way, right? And we're all still living here. All the solar systems are still here. Everything is still functioning. You know.
Well, no, I think like even like God as that idea, or even like you were saying, that it could be sort of happening through people, or you said that Samuel said that things change, but a lot of the ideas and themes stay the same. I think one thing that I always actually feel bad for, because I had, it's a lot of times you tell people like you're an atheist, then they think like you only like fuck with like people that only don't believe, you know. But I have tons of friends, like especially in creative circles, and especially that are of all different walks of life and religion stuff, and I've always actually felt bad in a sense. I have a couple very close Christian friends, and just even that alone, it's other people get in the way of the good ideas that I feel religions try to put in the world, or the ideas of God. Where, you know, even in America, there's like almost two types of predominant Christian, and I always feel the one that always is choosing to do the not good things gets the most headlines over someone that's truly just trying to be a kind, good, generous person, put love out into the world, receive love back, try to be good and follow a positive message of, if they are a decent human being, they will ascend to the heaven that they believe that they want to go to. And then with any religion, or any group, you can have a corrupted ideology of, like, you won't find like American evangelical sort of like conservative religion predominantly in other Christian places. It's a very American thing. The millionaire.
Where do you think that came from?
Capital, like the intersection of capitalism and religion.
Right. No, but I'm
You
saying
can make money off of this thought
Oh,
process.
I'm saying. Oh, I see. What
Like,
you're
you know,
saying.
like
I see
we are
what
the
you're
only
saying.
place that really
Right.
has like the billionaire,
Mindset.
or like the billionaire priests and reverends and televangelists. Like that's an American thing that even some Christians I'm friends with do not. They don't like that exists because we, especially me when I was younger, that's all I thought Christianity was. Was like the American televangelical sort of like God will punish you, God hates gay people, God like I thought that's what that's Christianity. That's right. Like this is what's on the TV. This is, and then you talk to actual on the ground Christian individuals that are like, I don't subscribe to that, and I can't stand that. That's what I get lumped in with when I'm actually just trying to be a good, decent neighbor in my community. And so again, I think it goes back to another thing you said that, we go like this. I'm able to look back at my younger self and say that even though my iterations of what a God might be to me and religion might be to me, I've allowed that to change over time. And that clearly when I was younger and I thought that this was the only version of Christianity, like I was being ignorant, whether unintentionally or intentionally, and you either try to grow out of that to then see that like every person that says they're Christian doesn't fall into the group that you think represents the bad version of any type of group. You know, and I've always felt that that's probably what's turned me off to the organized part of religion, is the aspect of kind of a control to it that sort of gives you guidelines that you can't like sort of veer away from, or like you might be like burning in eternal flames. It's like a really scary thing when you're a kid and a church is telling you that, or a priest, like an authority figure is telling you that. It kind of the fear is the fear is what keeps me in line. Does fear keep a lot of people in line in that aspect, or are you able to believe in God, live your life freely, follow the message, the positive message of God, of Jesus, or whatever religion you're in and how you subscribe to what God is.
Right.
And in my mind, I'm like, I think that if you believe in your heaven and you say like if your brain can materialize that for you, I don't see why that person wouldn't go. Because, because they're using the ideas of the religion that was passed down to be a good person. And anyone that uses their belief to be a good person, I love in my book. I think it all even goes back to the collaborative conversation I was having. Work, religion, when people from different walks of life have to get together on something, it comes down to like if these people are good and decent people for me, all that other stuff, I'm not gonna judge how they got to that point to be a good and decent neighbor. And I hope that like you said, like maybe we all can be right, and our brains can materialize sort of whatever the afterlife might be for us. I don't even know if I got anywhere near an answer to the question you asked.
No, definitely. Look, I feel like there's no right answer in general, right? Like, who knows at the end of the day? We're all just here.
One thing I want to say before I forget, the brain, the power of the brain.
Right.
I do believe in that aspect, though, that like our brain is worlds beyond powerful than the potential we could even tap into it. I mean, I forget like how much of our brain we even use is like so minuscule comparatively. But it's a powerful muscle and just a powerful sort of, I mean, like in the literal sense of power and electricity. I mean, it exists in our brain.
Right.
And the one thing that made me change when I was a little bit younger about just the idea similar to that and what we can materialize with our brain power was my grandfather. He had dementia and Alzheimer's. And the craziest thing to me about that.
How old were you?
Probably like 19, 20, when he started really going like getting worse. But one of the wildest things though, and then I even had an ex-girlfriend that worked in like like an elder facility that used to say similar things about some of the people that had dementia, was that when he was conscious of who he was, but he was like, I'm 84-year-old Walter McGowan. He was an 84-year-old man. He couldn't get out of a chair. He couldn't get up and off the toilet. He had to use a walker with tennis balls on it. He had to have his food softened for him. When he was in the now, in the conscious reality of his literal existence as an 84-year-old man, he was an 84-year-old man. But when he would have moments and revert and think he was like 10 getting ready for school to wait for the bus, my aunt used to find him outside sometimes on the corner with no walker, fully dressed, and a bag like lunch. That his mind convinced him he was 10 again, and that he was 10. There was no other artifice. It was like that was reality. It was, I'm 10 years old, I'm going to be late for the bus. Jesus. And somehow got himself ready and outside. Or even not to that extreme where he would think he was just younger. She would find him like at at the sink, like trying to do dishes. No walker. Like, and I was just I'll say that's a complete. His mind, even though it was deteriorating, was actually creating a different reality for him, in which his body was able to react to because of the power of what his mind, even in a negative way, was doing to him, and obviously bringing him closer to the end of his life. But it was kind of wild how it was able to change his reality, where if he didn't think he was 84-year-old Walter McGowan, he could like function, and then when he knew he was 84-year-old Walter McGowan, he was at 84, like but and you're like, well, it's not even just the physical aspect. When he's lucid, his mind is also probably just weighing on him because he knows he's not well, and he's older, and he's getting closer to death. So the mental aspect beyond the physical is also going to keep him down because he's nearing the end. And that for me was like an example. I think you might even tie into what you're saying, like that if your mind actually alters your reality for you, it almost kind of becomes it. So in a way, to say what you're saying, that if in the afterlife our mind is firing off while we're dying, and our dying thoughts or whatever it is materializes what we might perceive as the afterlife, who's to say who's to say that that's not accurate, that it won't give you what it is that you've been sort of mentally perceiving your whole life.
It's like mental conditioning. Seeing your grandfather go through this, how would you feel being in that? Like, would you even want to be in that? Like, is that something that now that you've seen your grandfather like have gone through that, would you want to have some type of thing written down where you're just like, if I go through this, X, Y, and Z should happen?
I mean, it's like, it's scary to like obviously watch someone deteriorate that way, but then to think, like, I can't even fathom what it is for him.
Right.
Like the confusion of that ending of your life going out that way, just the pure confusion of some days waking up knowing who you are, and then some days not, and then you're so convinced that then it's just the dementia. It's just or had to have like your children show up and then you don't recognize them, and then how that affects them. And you're almost like, is he safeguarded from that because he doesn't even realize that he's made that mistake? But then when he was like, there's times where it's not that concrete, where he'd be stuck between, and so it's just pure confusion and fear for an older person. That's actually kind of, they're not completely sort of like making up this, they're not completely reverting, but they also aren't completely have a grasp on who they are and who everyone is around them. And I mean, that's got to be like when we're born, we're obviously conscious, but like we grow and our brains evolve at a pace in which we can kind of take the world in and not understand things, but have people to teach us, and we can start to. But like to me, you watch someone that's going through that, and it's almost like the light switch in their head is constantly being toggled, and it's like they're being shot back into reality and waiting for the rest of the information to catch up to their consciousness. That's got to be terrifying. That's got to be absolutely terrifying to have an adult conscience and not fully grasp where you are, who the people are around you, the body you're in. I mean, that sounds like one of the scariest.
Or maybe it's not because you don't even know it.
The parts I think part of the time is you hope that maybe that was the case.
Has he ever seen Terrified before?
You know, like, I mean, that's what's also scary about it too, is you see someone that you've known your whole life in a way you've never seen them.
Wow, yeah.
You never see them that vulnerable or
Right.
that scared
Right.
or not know who's who and what's what. So some of it might be projecting your fear of seeing them go through that, but then I wouldn't, like the confusion of that, living in that has to also be terrifying. I think part of what you do is you hope that like after they pass, that the times they were deep in it, that they were so deep in it, that they were unaware of their own like heartbreak or fear. But I still feel like it's probably there's a movie called The Father with Anthony Hopkins.
Okay.
A couple years ago, he won the Oscar for it. That movie is like a horror movie, but like it's not. It's you're basically watching you're in his perspective going through dementia, and I felt that movie captured probably what that might be for somebody.
Wow. Oof.
So instead of like most movies, like when you deal with that, it's like it's like the kids that are dealing, and you're getting their perspective of like the ailing, dying parent. This whole movie is done from his perspective, and where he's walking through like one scene, he knows who his daughter is. And then like the next scene, she's played by a different actress because he doesn't recognize her.
Is it like first person or is it third person?
It's third person, but it keeps you like very tight to his perspective.
Okay, word. Yeah.
And just doing that kind of like where like different actors will play his kids and in-laws when he remembers who they are, and then when he doesn't, they look like someone else.
Whoa.
And then times where and so the movie does that to you, and you actually feel like you're in this real-time event of a person going through that. And that's why I said it plays like a horror movie, because you're like, this is the confusion of this. It seems terrifying for someone to go through this. But but then there's this weird proof of like the power of the mind in what it can convince itself of.
Right.
If it's altered the consciousness like reality.
Wow.
But yeah, it was like a one time in my life where I was like, I saw just a true. It's like unfortunate at the end of someone else's life and what they're going through can sort of change your perspective on like the power of the mind.
I'm ignorant on the matter, but does like dementia like just happen randomly? Is it hereditary? Is it like something?
I don't want to speak like out of place. I'm not 100. I think it can be hereditary. I know it happens more in younger people than it's ever happened before.
Really?
Like you can find like people get it in their 40s sometimes. I mean, Bruce Willis, he's not in his 40s, but he's like in his 60s now. That's the reason he stepped away from acting, is he has the onset of like another disease that leads to dementia.
Wow.
And so it's really just like a deterioration of the brain, essentially. And so that's the thing, is like, in layman's terms, I guess, memory can become reality because your brain is just not processing the difference between your concrete reality and sort of your other thoughts and memories. So it's like almost like the walls are falling down between all the like parts that are separating what functions your brain is supposed to do for you. But if they're all starting to meld like that, what you're thinking is the only reality. So if it's a concrete, lucid thought of when you were a kid, then that's what reality was for my grandfather. If it was, he could catch back up to like being 84, then that's who he was. But then a lot of other times, it's just confusion because it's just like a pool of thoughts that he couldn't process to fully rationalize the reality he was in.
Sheesh. Have you ever done psychedelics?
I did, yeah. I did like acid once. That was intense. I've done shrooms a few times.
Well, you just did a tab?
Yeah, I just did one.
Okay. What happened?
So instead of like weaning my way up to it, I really only like smoked weed and drank. Mm-hmm. And then a buddy of mine that I trusted, who I had seen on it before, was just like, "Would you want to try it?" So we like went out on like a camping trip. It did it, and I only did it the once because it was definitely like highs and lows to it. Mm-hmm. The highs were like euphoric. Mm-hmm. You know, you're just like, I can't. The conversations we were having, the thoughts you're having, the amount of laughter that we would like, and just, but the lows. Like when something would scare me, I would feel the most, like it was like the most intense fear. Mm-hmm. So for me, when after we did it, I was like, if I can only feel the better parts of that trip, cool. But like the parts that make me face all the darker stuff, or that were just innately scaring me, was a lot.
That's funny that you say that because I had the similar experience the first time ever trying acid. I had a great time, but then there was a certain point. This is a friend of mine from the past that I knew a while ago. He had the soccer ball, right? And like he kicked the soccer ball and it almost got this rat. And in my mind I'm like, holy shit, like he almost killed that rat. And I got mad scared.
You latch on to like
I don't know why I got mad scared, but yeah.
And it intensified. I remember I had a flashlight, and I don't like. So like I only happened when I did acid, where you kind of, I've seen other people with other hallucinogenics where you kind of like, you like can lock onto an object as like a safety blanket, like, and I did that with a flashlight I had because we were camping and we were outside by a fire pit, and then my friend convinced me, like, bro, like just let it go. Let it go. So I was like, you're right. I stood up and like overly dramatic. I like threw it into the field out near the campfire.
You kind of
and then for no reason. Well, one of my buddies, he goes, "Dude, what would you do right now? We're all here. What would you do right now if all of a sudden, like, it turned on pointing back at us? Like someone picked it up in the darkness." And I'm like, why would you say that?
Yeah, I was about to say that right now.
Dude, so then I don't want that to happen. So now I convinced myself I gotta go get the flashlight because I don't want that to happen. So now I'm walking out in the pitch black. I get it. I turn it on, and when I turn back, I don't know what it was, just because you're starting to like see stuff, and I got locked on like, so trees at night are terrifying on hallucinogenics. They're just fucking terrifying.
For you, maybe.
I don't know. For me, I'm like, the branches seem like finger, like they just seem like they're gonna snatch you off. Like to me, at least, they just look like they're imposing. And I got locked on that, and I'm thinking of like, I'm out here alone now. What if someone else was out here? And then you just start to go down that.
Right.
And then a buddy of mine, like, he just kind of came over and like snapped me out of it.
Nice.
But I just remember being like, oh, I was having such a good time, and now I'm like terrified, and I can't turn it off. I'm conscious that I'm on this drug,
right?
But that doesn't stop. I can't turn this off. This feeling right now.
You have to ride it.
And then it just felt like too long. Like the sun came up, and I was like, why do I still feel
a little bit of it? Right.
And I was like, this is like really, really long. So I only did that the one time. I've done shrooms a few times because like I feel like the trip is just
better,
shorter, and communal. Acid, none of us really, in the beginning, you kind of see like the light fractals. But then the three of us were like on our own journey.
Right.
And so you actually aren't necessarily seeing the same shit.
Right.
Which then can also make you like apprehensive.
Depending on, yeah.
With like the shrooms, I've done those a few times with people. And I had like one kind of bad trip, but mostly like you're all kind of seeing the same paisley patterns, and you're laughing or whatever it is. It's not as long, so you can kind of like get at you know, like this is I'm gonna come down like.
It is interesting they say communal too. You know, like excuse me. Apparently, certain jungles, different animals come together and eat shrooms.
I believe it.
Like, I really do feel like it has some type of communal aspect.
And I think that's what I've always looked back on. Now I just like smoke weed sometimes. But when I was looking back, when I used to do more like different stuff, was I don't know, like weed and shrooms, like they're natural. Like they kind of nothing's being added to them.
And DMT.
You know, where like acid, I know that that's like made in some labs, some, you know, like not that that's like, it's just, I feel like that's why it wasn't communal and it becomes individualized, like psychological, because acid was used in psychological experiments to try to do the opposite to people that were sort of having breakdowns in episodes and institutions. So if you're not on that level and you're doing this, it's going to start to burrow into the subconscious in ways that it might bring out intense fear or uglier thoughts or sort of stuff like that. And I was like, well, it's kind of designed to do that to you psychologically.
Right.
And then so with like shrooms, it was more natural. I just felt like it didn't never make me feel that way afterwards. I didn't feel as altered as I did after I did acid, where I was just like, oh, there's no going back from what, even if I only did it the one time, there's no going back from like psychologically what that experience
you're right.
does to you outside out the other side.
It's true. The shrooms you feel like you could revert.
Yeah, no, I just like in the natural order of it, the communal aspect of it, it was like we all were kind of sharing and seeing the same thing, and never felt the fear that I had gotten on when I did the acid that time. Was just different. It was just different. More like, you know, and the only reason I did shrooms was I had done acid first. And then my buddy was like, oh, dude, this is like nowhere as intense as that. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll try that. And I was like, oh, he's right. It's not, you know, I mean, I was also scared when I did them one time, but like I did that time with someone else that was on more of it than me. So he was actually like more detached from reality. Right. Yeah. I was on one, it didn't get me detached from reality. So there's also the whole, like, I'm a worrier with like taking care of people. So I'm like, oh, he's like so detached. I got to kind of watch after this guy, right? But I'm on it. And so then that happens to you if you feel like you naturally need to sort of like watch over people. But no, yeah, those are my experiences with sort of like hallucinogenic.
Yeah. No, I just feel like there are certain parts of psychedelic experiences that could be great. Some definitely could be bad. I really do agree with you on the whole like acid, like man-made. I feel like the fact that it's man-made, it kind of brings you to a dark place or some shit. And then like that is something natural from Mother Nature would be really good, which I feel like kind of goes back to your whole God is a Woman book. And I want you to go into that a little bit in terms of getting it out, published, and delivered into...
This is a
copy. Snap. Oh, snap. Oh!
It's a copy for you.
Thank you, bro.
Yeah,
Hell yeah.
I appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you. This is really nice. But all right, cool. How'd you get this with the company...
Quarentia Press. They're based in Chicago. So I was done with it, and I had the collection. I really didn't know what to do with it because it was different than anything else I had written. And then I was like almost scared going back, like getting away from spoken word. And I was like, oh, I'm like rusty at going back to like the style of poetry that I started up when I was a kid and I used to write journals. So I didn't really know what to do with it. And then they had like an open submission calling. And then even that, I was like, it's a all female-led press. So I was like, maybe this will fit with them. And then so I sent it into their submission process. I think maybe like a month or so later, the editor-in-chief, Emily, reached out and said that they'd like to give it, they'd like to pick it up and like put it out. And then that was awesome. And then, then you go from there, you go through some editing sessions with them, and then working on, so Emily also like designed the cover, but
Nice.
she allowed me to,
She's fire.
like she allowed me to like give my ideas, and then she sort of took those ideas and kind of made it what it was, where I wanted to kind of harness all elements into sort of a woman figure.
You got fire.
And then we were close to putting it out, and then I had this kind of attack of my own conscience that I was self-aware that I was an all-female led press, and I was sort of I was like just like a straight white dude getting, like I was getting a seat at the press with my book that was not going to like a female writer or a woman identifying writer or just anyone else that typically fit sort of what they would take. And that didn't really sit right with me as well. So then I came up with the idea. I get so very self-aware.
Why did it sit right? Why did it sit right?
I get very self-aware.
Because you weren't a woman?
Well, no, like I understand like where everything fits in the world. I'm grateful they took it. I don't even think they would think that deeply into how I thought of it. But that when you're sort of, if there's like only a certain amount of seats at a table that would typically go, like if someone's building a press to give seats that are not normally given at a table to a certain demographic of people, and me representing more like that probably always gets a seat at the table, gets one of those seats at that table. So then that's why I don't actually I don't make any profit on this book. All of my royalties go to the National Abortion Foundation.
Wow.
Because then when this was coming out, it was right when the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade. And so anyone that buys this book, I don't see a dime. Any of my money goes to like help that fight, so that women can have the choice to do whatever they want with their body. And that's what made me feel comfortable to like actually put this out with them. Because I was like, this has to be, they're giving me this opportunity, and they could have taken any other number of women's books that probably got submitted.
Right.
And so then that made me feel comfortable then like moving forward with it, to make sure that any money that was coming back to it could go to actually like help help women and body autonomy fight in that sort of. So then it all just kind of weirdly came together, and then they were like, well, they were into that idea, and then the book was what it was, and then it's been out, I think in September it'll be a year. I'm proud of it, and it's helped me down my own spiritual path. It's helped me just navigate my own interactions to women, and just sort of helped me harness just like, we were kind of saying earlier, like not on here, but we were talking before, sort of men that know how to speak to women, that appreciate, and I've always had it like dabbled in here and there where like friends and female friends and even exes and stuff, I've always wanted me to maybe go more down that avenue with this type of poetry, and so that's what it is, and I'm very proud of it, and it's came from all these kind of, it's odd. It came from that one question of someone asking me how I would define it, and then became its own thing, and found like the only place I feel like it should have ever ended up is with them. And then coming up with like, well, how do we add like an initiative to it? It all felt right. The process was pretty organic.
Do you feel like this is going to be evolved into anything else?
So I've like had a few people ask me.
And also, sorry, do you also feel like it's interesting, because I don't want to let go of this thought.
No.
But do you also feel like that it's interesting that that literature on its own, so if someone is subjected to just read the literature on its own without a person to attach the words to, it really is genderless, Because they thought you were a woman, I assume, right? Or they thought
so this is like a really odd thing. I've never felt I've had to contextualize anything I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And like just this title alone, in certain circumstances, has made me have to contextualize it in like very different ways. So I've had a message where I've been told, it's crazy. One is I've been told my own belief that like someone told me that, well, God is genderless. And I'm like, well, technically, yes. My concrete belief, as I talked about as a kid, is that I feel like equal parts come out of it. Mm-hmm. Where then I'm like, well, yeah, this is more like a concrete exploration of like women, feminine energy as related to my life in the concrete world. Mm-hmm. Which I'm like, normally I wouldn't, you wouldn't have to give that much context to somebody. I've had the opposite where basically God is a male figure. I've gotten like a DM, which was like an interesting conversation. Mm-hmm. Where then I was like, well, again, having to recontextualize it for that person because they're like, they're kind of not happy with me that I've done that. Mm. Then I've had...
Where do you think their anger comes from?
I think typically like when you assume something, you make an ass out of you. Like it's an assumption of a title. And I'm like, wow, it wasn't meant to like ruffle feathers. It was really just like a personal exploration. Mm-hmm. But I get it. Once you put something out there, if there's no context, because then I've even had... The other version is that I'm making some kind of statement on like womanhood, or I'm making some kind of statement on like identity. Like cause like of just the topics and sort of just what makes a woman, or identification, or transgenderism. And I'm like, none of that was like it's simply like a personal exploration. Like, I'm not making a statement about womanhood. I'm not making a statement about who can possess feminine energy or feminine identity. And so I was like, but if you, it's just, I've never had to recontextualize. And those are three...
So you had to clarify that to people?
Those are three separate interpretations that I felt like I've had to recontextualize for different perspectives before they even opened it up. And being like, almost like having to be like, whoa, like, none of the three things you're thinking were any part of my approach to just writing some poetry about ex-lovers and women that helped sort of like guide me, raise me, or even just just simply parts of me where I'm just I'm diving into just like the sexuality of my own life in like, and so I was like, oh wow, it's like, but like, I guess it goes back to like why you really should never judge a book by its cover. Like get into it. And so yeah, it's interesting that I've had to like, and usually when you have to recontextualize something, it's like several people having the same interpretation or the same misinterpretation. I was like, damn, like this is like three different aspects of a way that someone could interpret just the title of a poetry collection. In which, you have to have a little longer dialogue to get to like the personal aspect of it. I was like, it's just fascinating to me how we just work as a society and how we interpret
and the fact that you're alive to explain, right?
Yeah. So it's been an interesting little collection of poems in many ways, but that's brought me to like really awesome conversations just in different aspects, like. Even today, I love that just sort of like just like this word, God, can go open up such a dialogue. Definitely. If people are open to just
have that conversation.
Like just chatting about how they got to the beliefs and experiences that led them there. You can have some really fascinating conversations. Yeah. But then if you're two creatives, we can now leave here and who knows what we'll make into the conversation we had today.
That's true.
Over like 1 3-letter word.
Right. Well, I was also just thinking about what kind of music I'll make after reading this. But
I think, well, actually, man, like I think there's certain ones in here. I'm not joking. Where I've never really written about relationships or particularly the sexual side of relationships too openly in like any kind of work. And this is still kind of like. a lot of metaphorical stuff in it. But I've never really dove into that part of my life and put it out, and so I know, I mean, we were talking about before, like, and I know
I
some
think
of
it's
your
very
music
important.
is driven by your sort of your relationship to women, sexual, romantic. So I think you actually might be into this book.
I definitely will be into this book. I think it's very important, our relationships, because usually a lot of the problems come from when like men aren't so confident and feel comfortable with speaking with women and just asking for what they want. Like we all want something, we all have desires. Like saying it in a certain way, could really change the game. A lot of people are in relationships that they don't necessarily want to be in, but they're just caught up in.
Sure.
And then there's some people that I feel like are in relationships that they truly want to be in that relationship with someone. And you don't know whether or not that could be you until you're caught up in a situation where it has to prove. And this is when I feel like I have the right to say this, your manhood. You know what I mean? Like, how you was raised, how you took in the world, and what certain avenues of respect you follow to like live life. I've gone through so many situations with people where like they probably think I'm a fucking asshole because like I have a mouth where it's like, oh, if you think you can say something, I'm gonna say something right back. You know what I mean? And I've learned that not everything has to be said.
Sure.
But then I also feel like, well, who's gonna say it? Yeah, sometimes. So I go on this back and forth thing in my mind. Do you ever do that?
Sure. I mean, I definitely was more confrontational like when I was younger, and then you learn like what's worth confrontation, not even just in like, a romantic relationship, just in any kind of relationship. You learn. Now, everything I base around is like energy. What is worth my energy and not worth my energy? I think typically in functioning relationships, again, of like whether it's romantic, familial, friend, coworker, there's like a give and take of energy and what's worth your energy. And if good relationships are based on people that don't drain energy, but actually like when you're actively saying like this person is worth this like amount of my energy, where a confrontation or arguments or political dispute or any kind of like, you're usually not going to get anywhere other than wasting your own energy. No, just like you learn that most confrontations don't lead anyone to changing their mind. And so all you both will end up doing is just wasting energy that could be used elsewhere. When you find people you gel with in a relationship, you're not really wasting each other's energy. Or like any confrontation, if you're both there to move forward in the relationship, it doesn't become confrontation. It's more of just a challenge you get through because you are two individual people. They're like, that's the whole thing. It's like, it's a balance, not a control. Where we're together, but we're also two very separate people whose minds are going to change and grow. And you have to, instead of confrontation, using energy to grow with someone. And it's either going to be met or not met. But it makes me a way more just sort of like go with the flow type of person when it comes to relational, like energy particularly, or just in general. And just knowing, like when you say like about manhood, it's like for me, it's always been simply emotional intelligence and emotional honesty will allow you to be whatever version of yourself you need to be in any given circumstance. And that makes you a whole human. So if you need to be loving and compassionate and caring in this circumstance, if you have the emotional intelligence and emotional honesty to be that, you will. If you need to be protective, or you will, if you have the emotional honesty. Even people always like, I think anger is an amazing element, like amazing feeling. Problem is most men, either they already have issues where they don't have confidence with women, or they look at women as objective, like just an object and not a human, and then they mix that with like anger that doesn't get processed correctly, and they become a not good individual for society. Where like anger is a wonderful tool if you're harnessing it and processing it in productive ways. It could be physical activity. It could be art.
Yeah, definitely.
Half the reason why I get up and I kind of like am as forceful as I am when I perform is I'm usually processing some prior anger for something that's allowing me to deal with it in a healthy way. And I just think, like for me, that's like if you're able to be emotionally honest and emotionally intelligent and use those in the aspect that they need to for the relationship, it'll function. It'll function because that goes back to the first thing we had mentioned. It's like everything kind of goes back to honesty, right? Like, whether it's emotional honesty or it's just being honest about any part of your day or whatever it is, or it kind of all feel like things stem back to that, which then even probably stems to this book. I'm being very emotionally honest in this book about different aspects of women in my life.
Wow, that's dope. I can't wait to read it, man. What's next for TJ?
I'm currently writing the companion novel to the one that came out last year. I have like the Timeless Gardens came out actually a year ago, May 3rd. And then I have a second book that's going to be put out on Two Eyes Publishing. I guess it's a sequel, but it's more like I keep calling it a companion piece because it's like same world, venturing down some different characters. Okay. So that's kind of what's on the horizon.
That's dope. And I know that people can find you at Everyday Munch.
The Everyday Bite.
Everyday Munch. I said Everyday Munch. I think about Ice Spice's song, Everyday Bite. Everyday Bite. Why'd you choose Everyday Bite? I like that. This is good.
Quick answer. I'm obsessed with time and mortality. And I feel like life takes a bite out of us every day. Oof. And that we're sooner or later, there's going to be nothing left for life to chew. Like, there's going to be no bites left eventually. Yeah. And we'll be dead. So my mortality and death for me is a motivator. To try to follow my creative pursuits, to be a better version of who I was yesterday, to find ways to be more compassionate and kind to people, because it is a very short, brief time we get here. And it's all the cliches are true. We don't know what anybody's going through. You could cheer a stranger up. Because I always feel like if you've been deep down in the pits of your own, like, internal demise and depression or whatever it is, you know how it feels. And, like, the worst feeling is thinking that other people might feel that way. So my mortality, like, helps me be the best version of myself, because I could sit around and wallow, or I could try to, like, get shit done, and maybe something I write moves somebody, or my interactions throughout the day can be better or serve a better purpose, or put more positivity if I can.
While you're here.
Yeah. And authentic positivity, like true honesty and authentic positivity. Yeah, that's the Everyday Bite,
That's dope as hell, man. So, I appreciate you coming on.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me. It's a great convo.
It's the conversation. Yeah. Take your mind different places. Now you know.